We prepared for a crazy COVID surge. Yeah. This all started as 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Let's go.
The U.S. Navy hospital ship Mercy is pulling into the port behind me here in San Pedro, California. It has 1,000 much-needed hospital beds, 900 medical personnel, and that is really going to help relieve the pressure on L.A. area hospitals during this pandemic.
Couldn't make their bed when they knew the news
really
was coming?
started to spike in Massachusetts, the state rushed to increase its hospital bed capacity. 22 News State House reporter Jody Reed joins us live from Boston.
Thank
Jody,
you,
there are big
Bateman.
questions tonight about whether the measures the state took early on were actually necessary.
Right now, 2 out of the 4 field hospitals in the state remain empty. In fact, they never even saw a single patient.
Wow. UK's $6.7 million field hospital at Nutter Fieldhouse is officially closed. That word today from UK officials.
Based on the data we have now, based on the models that have been established that we have now, we don't believe we'll need that field hospital.
This was the whole thing, right? Flatten the curve. Yeah. They had all of these empty hospitals and buildings. I want to make sure that you understand, because now people are saying, well, we don't have enough beds. We don't have it. Well, that's partially true.
Partially true.
But the reason why, it's not just because of COVID. It's not just because there was a crazy surge of COVID and we weren't ready for it. No, that's actually the opposite of what happened in a lot of these cases. So now the claim is hospitals, after you just saw those empty hospitals for a very, very long time, hospitals have no free beds now and they're over capacity. Here you go.
South Carolina hospitals are once again reaching their limits due to an influx of COVID-19 patients.
At the Asante Three Rivers Medical Center in Grants Pass, things are as busy as ever. 100% of the patients in the ICU suffer from the COVID-19 virus. Warfield? The current COVID surge is still overwhelming the hospital.
We are perilously close, as you mentioned in the beginning of the segment, of having, in certain areas of the country, getting so close to having full occupancy that you're going to be in a situation where you're going to have to make some very tough choices.
Okay, so here's something that a lot of hospitals operate close to capacity as a business model, period.
Yeah.
Okay? Dr. Mark Boone, the CEO of Houston Methodist Hospital, he actually explained this in August. Now, I'm just using this as a specific example.
Right.
However, this is well known as a business model for the same reason that we only bought enough studio space that we were going to use.
Right, yeah. You don't want a ton of excess capacity.
You don't want a ton of excess capacity. That's not only when you're talking about rent, when you're talking, if you're even buying this property, talking about heating, cooling, utility costs. Yeah. This is how, not to mention staffing, this is very, very commonplace. So the context matters. Let's have Dr. Mark Boone talk about this from Houston Methodist.
So I pulled up June 25th, 2019, exactly 1 year ago, and said, okay, what was our ICU capacity at 1 year ago today? It was at 95%. We are highly experienced at utilizing our ICU beds for the sickest of the sick patients day in, day out, as I've said. And it is completely normal for us
that guy in the bottom right
have ICU
thinks that we believe he's actually in front of Buckingham Palace or
whatever the hell that is. Operate hospitals, how all hospitals operate. What's different now, of course, is that about 1 in 4 of those ICU patients are COVID patients at our hospital system right now.
The top left
so clearly
like
that means some of the non-COVID ICU
series.
care has already been titrated down a little to allow that level to happen. But this is an activity we do day in, day out, as I've said. So we have many levers at our in our ability to adjust our ICU use.
Now we're also being told that the nurses are burnt out, right? That they're burnt out over them, despite the empty hospitals that you just saw that were built for this, and that this is the reason there is a staffing shortage. Again, all of this is being crafted so that you believe a narrative.
Crack in the front line in the battle against COVID. Nurses are burned out and considering leaving the profession altogether. The state and nation facing a nurse shortage that's only expected to get worse.
Our healthcare workers are overworked. They're mentally and emotionally exhausted. And now some Valley nurses are leaving the profession to pursue other careers.
Doctors and nurses across the United States are struggling under the burden of a fourth wave of hospitalizations and deaths, driven by the Delta variant and the close to 40% of Americans who remain unvaccinated.
All right, that's enough. Let's just pause that real quick because we have to move this pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So look, here's the reason that there are actually a lot of nursing shortages. It's not because all of them are burnt out, despite what nurses tell you on TikTok. Many hospitals were forced to pause all elective procedures, meaning it was all hands on deck COVID, build up new hospitals for COVID exclusively, and stop any treatment for anything other than COVID, even though you just heard, from Houston Methodist, for example, at any point in time, 1 in 4 patients may be COVID. What would constitute elective procedures, by the way? Well, minor things like heart stents, right? Heart valve surgery, mammograms, kidney stone removal, hip and knee replacements. These were all put on pause.
Back surgery.
They were all put on pause. And so what happened was a record number of nurses were laid off.
Yeah.
They were laid off or they were furloughed, which is, I guess, basically they don't technically fire a nurse. Because
it's like we don't really want to kind of fire you. We're going to call you back in like 3 months.
Nurses who've been furloughed, nurses who've had their hours cut. In April 2020, so this is overlay P.
Yeah.
A record number, 1.4 million healthcare workers. 1.4 million healthcare workers were laid off or had their hours cut.
That's insane.
And of course, many of the field hospitals constructed, they never had any patients.
No.
At all.
A lot of the ships didn't have patients.
There were 77 total at the Mercy.
I think they need more ghost ships.
Right, yes. 182 total patients for the Comfort New York. In New York, 155 million spent on tents at Stony Brook University. 0 patients.
Oh my gosh!
So just to be clear, this is a self-inflicted wound. They said we need to flatten the curve.
Yeah.
Okay, we need to flatten the curve and all elective procedures. And so then a record number of healthcare workers were laid off. And so what happens is you don't have the staffing for a lot of these beds that are already operating at capacity anyway. This is a self-inflicted wound because of mass media hysteria. Let's be really, really clear. Also, I would make the argument that someone who needs serious cardiovascular surgery should probably be given priority over someone with a milder case of COVID. That's just opinion. I'm not a doctor, and neither are you.
Well, I think they should certainly be given it over 0 patients.
Right.
It's like I need a heart stent. It's like, I'm sorry, there's no one here. I can't help you.
So now the claim is that, well, nurses are quitting because of now these burdens that come with treating COVID patients.
Right.
So they want you to believe that now, even though there's a record number of layoffs, now a lot of nurses are leaving. And that is true.
Yeah.
But it's because of they just can't even. This is what they're saying now.
Penn LDI study that looked at hospital understaffing in New York and Illinois found that, quote, each additional patient per nurse was associated with significant increases in the odds of nurses reporting poor outcomes, including job dissatisfaction, intent to leave their job, and high burnout.
The latest surge is pushing his healthcare workers to the breaking point.
We've had people literally walk off the job because they couldn't take it anymore.
Somebody walking off of their shift at this hospital.
We've had people walk off their shift.
They walked
in the
right
past
shift, 155 empty beds.
As that is, because they just couldn't take it anymore.
In the state of Mississippi, some 2,000 nurses have quit since the pandemic.
It's every day. I mean, just people can't take it. It's not because they don't want to do a good job. We've made it really hard for them with this influx to our healthcare system.
Okay, let's cut this. Let's cut this because it's just going to keep going on. Stress, burnout, fatigue. Actually, no, there's another reason that there's a staffing shortage with nurses, that nurses are walking off the job. There you go. I was actually going to ask you before pause it, before you comment, what do you think it is? A huge portion of nurses are refusing to get the vaccine.
No.
Yeah. At least 153 employees, by the way, from Houston Methodist.
Wow.
They were fired for refusing the vaccine. 1/3 of all nurses at the University of Cincinnati, their medical center, said that they'd rather quit than get the vaccine. In New York, 20% of hospital workers, all hospital workers, not vaccinated. Florida, 42%. Nationally, 1 in 4 workers have not gotten vaccinated. Now, I know you're saying, oh, only 42%, only 1/3. Here's the thing. When you've laid off a record number of nurses because you couldn't afford them due to putting basically a moratorium on all treatment that is not COVID, right? You're probably overextended because you built new wings that you didn't need with hospitals. 1/3, that's 33% of nurses refusing to be vaccinated will absolutely have catastrophic results as it relates to a labor shortage. That would happen in any industry. Imagine 33% of people at this show gone. 33% of people on any assembly line gone. That's a huge reason.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of these things happening at the same time, too, right? So this self-inflicted wound with some spikes in COVID, with the problem that people have this mass hysteria that they have to go to the hospital if they have the sniffles, right? So this whole like, oh, Delta variant surge thing. And it is a surge, absolutely, right? But everybody is so scared right now.
Which I don't understand how there's a surge when 75% of Americans have received at least one vaccine.
We're not doctors. We're not. We can't talk about that.
Don't make an inference. That's a conspiracy theory.
know,
If you go, wait,
right?
most people are vaccinated, but there's the same number
That's weird.
last year.
So many people sick.
You can't also argue that nurses are leaving because, let's say right now, they're not being paid fairly. No, as a matter of fact, hospitals want these nurses so badly that it's, you know how it's a buyer's market? It's a nurse's market right now. Massive sign-on bonuses, upwards of $100 an hour. Right? These are more than some doctors make. Yeah. Certainly some, like I think, or other people who've attended more medical school than nursing. People like some anesthesiologists, physician's assistants. Miami area hospitals, they're paying $85 to $105 an hour, $1,200 a week in travel expenses. Yeah. Baylor, Scott & White is offering a $15,000 sign-on bonus. Why? Because right now there are enough nurses. They're not just going, I'm stressed. They're saying, I don't want to get this vaccine. Whether you think they're crazy, stupid, or not, because you'll say that we're not doctors, well, guess what? They do work in the medical field, and a significant portion, certainly enough to disrupt the supply chain, of nurses have said they will quit sooner than get a vaccination. And Gerald, your wife, is a nurse, and we have permission to talk about this.
Yeah, she's a nurse. And so when we talked about what people should do with forced vaccines, which is coming up, October 1st, I think is the deadline for a lot of people in different hospital systems around the country, where they have to have the vaccination or be very, very, very clear about this, be fired. There is no grace. There is nothing after that. You don't go on like some administrative leave. You don't have to work from home. You are fired. You are done. There are nurses right now that are just walking off the job. Like, we've heard stories in the nursing community of 20 people on one shift saying, we're just going to leave. Yeah. In one shift of some of the best workers that these hospitals have.